but I think I'd rather go with the some kind of hall for important activities myself. Yes, so anyway, that brings us to sort of the conclusion of last week, and I want to move on to something else, which this time we looked last week and we sort of had Shetland as the sort of the most important part of the Northern Isles when it came to buildings. Now we're going to move to Orkney for something that Orkney has some outstanding examples of, and that's hoards. So I want to talk about hoards, what they are, what has been found, and the connections that that they're evidence for. Now, in an article of 1975, James Graham Campbell, who is the great expert on Viking silver and jewellery, he's a sort of world expert in that, he claimed there were 40 hoards found in Scotland from the 9th to the 12th century. Well, they weren't found in the 12th, dating to the 9th to 12th century. And you can read his article on that online, because all the proceedings of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, which are sort of a huge shelf full of blue books, are available online. They're kept in an online source at York University. So all you have to do is click on the site, say that you're going to not use this information for any nefarious purpose, whatever that might be, and then you have access to all these very interesting archaeological reports. So, Viking Age silver and gold hoards of Scandinavian character from Scotland, Proceedings of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, available online. And he points out that most of the hoards date to between 900 and 1050. How do we know that? Well, most of the dating is done on the basis of coins that are found in the hoard, and also an analysis of artistic styles of some of the material that's found in the hoard too. Now, I'm going to come off, that's the scale hoard. I've got other pictures of that, so I'm going to come off that just for a second. See what I'm doing here. That one. Okay. Oops. Right, okay. Sometimes, if you're lucky, also, you might get something that you can radiocarbon date in amongst the hoard. But most of the hoards that we have were discovered before archaeology really got going, and people only kept the good bits, rather than the fragments of rubbish that might have been associated with the hoard. And our most important hoards are, I'll just run through them, the Store hoard, which is from Skye. So that's not from the Northern Isles, but hey. And it was discovered in 1891. And first of all, 2 silver coins were found on the shore near Store Rock. And that got people excited, so they went poking about and found another 108 coins and 23 pieces of silver of different sorts. Hack silver, so it's been chopped into bits, as you can see. We know that the hoard must have been deposited around 935. This is dated on the 18 dirhams, which are Islamic coins that were found in the hoard. And they all date to before 935. See what I mean? So, and then there's a period, you add on a few years that you think these things might be in circulation, and they might have sort of travelled about. For example, there's a coin there, minted in 921 or 922, for Nasser II ben Ahmad, the Emir of Transoxiana and Khorasan. So you say, where's that? Uzbekistan is where that is nowadays. What I want you to take away from today's seminar is the astonishment at the connections with the Islamic world that this shows. The Vikings were intimately connected to the Islamic world. Intimately. Okay, so as it will become apparent. Right, yeah, so this is one of the coins. and it's, there was nothing much older than that, younger than that. So this is the kind of point at which this must have been acquired. This hoard was built up. There we go. This emir, lived at Bukhara. So it's really quite far away. Yeah. It's far away from our normal sort of visualization of the Viking world. We know the connections with Islam and these things, but somebody in Skye lost a hoard with coins from Bukhara. Prior to that, people in Skye might have had some connection to the Roman world when the Roman Empire was at its height. They might occasionally have had some connection with Gaul after the Roman Empire came to an end. But, that was the extent of their long-distance connection. Now, suddenly, they're connected to the Middle East. Well, in the Middle East, quite far east. So, the Store Hoard sort of sets us up for this extraordinary story. It's a story of 1001 Nights. This is the Arabic world of I forgot his name now. Wait a minute. Terrible. The Caliph who Scheherazade told all these stories to was actually alive in the early 9th century. He was a contemporary of Charlemagne and sent him an elephant, I think it was, or a camel. I think the sources are a bit vague on it. So this is just after 1001 Nights have actually been collected together. Okay, now moving a little bit north, the Bury hoard. This is a very large hoard, as you can see, and it comprises a few coins and a lot of these arm rings. Now, this was discovered in 1889, 22nd of April, no less, by Mr. Petrie of Littlewart, Bury, in a wooden container. And it weighs 1.9 kilograms, so it's quite a heavy hoard. The coins, these are not Islamic coins, these are, I'll show you. Hang on, I'll come back in a minute. A Cologne penny and English pennies, so it hasn't come from so far away. The Cologne penny is quite interesting because there seems to be a connection between the later Jarldom, the Jarldom of Thorfinn the Mighty, and Cologne. So this might be a precursor, sort of earlier connection. And it dates to just before the year 1000, this particular hoard. Now, most hoards in Scotland and some in England have these things in them, these arm rings. They're not decorative, they're not beautiful in any way, they're just functional. They're silver arm rings that have specific weights. I think there's 2 specific weights that they have, which I can't remember. So many grams, there's a smaller one, and then so many grams is a larger one. But they are standard. And they seem to be a form, they're sometimes called ring money. But what you could buy with them, I don't know, because you can't really buy small things. You might be able to, I'd like a female slave, please, okay, give us 10 arm rings. But you couldn't really sort of say, I'd like a pot, day-to-day do your messages with these things. But it was a way of storing your wealth as well. And they're probably made from melted down coins. Scottish hoards, despite the interest, the 110 coins in the Store rock hoard, tend to not have many coins. They tend to be more heavily weighted towards hack silver and arm rings. And it's suggested that although in the Viking world coinage came in and gradually became something you could use, in the Scottish part of the Viking world, coinage wasn't used very much. It wasn't really a coin economy. In Ireland, say in Dublin, they were minting lots of coins. Anglo-Saxon England was a coin economy. Everything was sort of valued in pennies. But Scotland and Viking Scotland don't seem to have been particularly involved in money as such. But they did have these instead, and these are really concentrated in Scotland, these arm rings. So that's it. The assumption is somebody may have gone off to Dublin, got himself a pot of silver coins, come back and melted them into arm rings and showed how powerful and wealthy he was. He's given to his wife. So there's lots of these in the Bury hoard. 26. There's 110 fragments of plain fanannular arm rings in the Bury hoard. So there's a lot of them. They're a bit like quoits. I'm sure the Vikings didn't play quoits with silver arm rings. Who knows? Maybe they did. Maybe that was a way of showing how wealthy they actually were. But the Bury hoard pales into insignificance compared to the Scale hoard, which we have here. Again, it's a 19th century find, 1858. A wee boy found something at the mouth of a rabbit hole and called everybody out, and they all started digging about, and they found this incredibly huge hoard. Rabbit holes are very handy for archaeologists and just folk who want to see what might be excavated. Because sometimes if you go to archaeological sites, you're not allowed to touch anything but the rabbits. Nobody's told the rabbits. So you can have a look at the rabbit holes, and you might be surprised what turns up. So, it was deposited between 960 and 980. There's been quite a lot of debate over time about when, but 960 to 980. Most of it now is in the National Museum in Edinburgh, and I'm sure Orcadians, when they go to have a look at it, complain, just like Shetlanders when they go to look at the St Ninian's Isle hoard. It's in a corner. So it's a bit like that. It's in a different corner from the St Ninian's Isle hoard. But you have to realise it's within the context of all sorts of other things that have been dug out of the ground. So that's where most of it is. Bits of it, however, turned up in the 20th century, so it was sort of divided out amongst the folk who found it. It wasn't kept in one great lump. So some parts of it surfaced later on, and they're now in the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow. And now it weighed over 7 kilograms, which is a lot. It's similar to some of the bigger hoards in Scandinavia. Not the biggest, we'll come to them soon.
So it's a deliberate deposit?
Yes, yeah. I don't think it fell out of his pockets. Yeah. But you could say deliberate. I mean, what do you mean when you dig a hole and stick this stuff down? There could be different reasons. This one looks like someone's, amassed wealth. I mean, this is a extremely wealthy hoard. These thistle brooches, these penannular brooches, these signify very high status. There was a law, an old Irish law, the Shinachas Mór, from the 9th century, which actually identified somebody's status by the size of the brooch that they wore. And although that's an old Irish, sort of Gaelic tradition, I'm sure it's exactly the same with the Norse, particularly those Norse who were in Ireland, because that's where these brooches come from. They were made in Dublin or thereabouts. So they're a sort of combination of traditional, if you want to use the word Celtic brooch, and Viking innovation. So they come from the Hiberno-Norse regions of Ireland. And they're big, so they're big status. You couldn't miss somebody walking around with one of those on. And it's not just one. There are, how many now? There are 2 complete and 14 fragmentary thistle brooches in that collection, as well as 21 coins. So it's not a lot of coins. In Scandinavia, you get a huge amount of coins and less of the rings or the brooches or whatever. But there are 21, and 19 of them are dirhams as well. from the Arabic world.
Spell that word.
Dirham. Sometimes you see it with an E, but I'm not quite sure what the seems to be a debate about how to spell it. But dirham. Shall we say if you put dirham or dirham into your Word document, it'll underline both of them. I'll think they're both spelt wrong. So, what was that? Yes, so there are 19 of those. Well, I'll come back to that in just a wee second. There we go. And one of them is this from the Caliph Abdullah ibn al-Muqtafi, who was the Caliph of Baghdad, 945-946. I quickly checked him up. He was only Caliph for a year. Didn't do terribly well. People were starving in the streets while he was Caliph, so he wasn't a great success. But nonetheless, from Baghdad. Okay, right. Come back to that just in a second. Now, so that's what dates it, okay? And it's another Islamic coin. These thistle brooches, let's have just a little word about them. As I say, they're enormous. You can't miss them. And there are about 70 that have been discovered so far in the British Isles. Not all as good as these, it has to be said. These are outstanding examples of the thistle brooch creation. Come back there. Hang on a sec. Seem to have lost my... there we go. One has been found in Shetland. So somebody was of high status enough to have one of these, or to perhaps the Gulberwick brooch is a remnant of a hoard. Maybe there's more to be found. Yeah. So if anyone knows where the actual brooch was found, next Saturday let's go out and...
What date was this?
The Gulberwick find, that was a 19th century find as well.
What was the date to that?
Oh, the actual thing. Well, it's again 950. Yeah, mid 10th century is when these things are at their peak.
Is this the one the boy was going to melt down?
Yes. Yeah. He may even have melted one down already. I don't know. Got found.
Maybe a lot of the hoard melt.
Yes, indeed. Yep. So, but also this comes back to what hoard's for. If it's a huge hoard, you think that's somebody's accumulated wealth, so they're probably putting it somewhere safe, in the hope of coming back to find it. A bit like you see from these pirate movies. You got your pirate map and you walk so many paces and you other paces, and that's where the treasure is buried. So there will, it's more than likely that some of the hoards are for that purpose. Other hoards, though, might be for something else. They might be ritual deposits. This sort of sticking valuable stuff in the ground, or destroying it some way, or sticking it in a loch, is an activity that goes all the way back to the Bronze Age in Northern Europe. You find hoards in water, in wells, and in lochs. You find things ritually broken and buried in the ground. So we know that sort of activity went on.
In Norse culture as well.
In Norse culture as well as Celtic culture, in sort of northwestern Atlantic, use of European culture. That's why you find all the bog bodies in Denmark and in Ireland and some in Scotland and Shetland as well. So deposition of important things in the ground for sacrificial purposes is not unheard of. So it's possible that some of the hoards were that for that reason too. Or also it could be, there's some suggestion that some hoards in Scandinavia at least commemorate weddings. So when you have two families, big important families come together, they deposit something in the border between their two territories as a kind of a symbolic statement that an important event has taken place, especially in a culture where you can't actually record what's going on. You have to do something physical to make people realise that. For example, when people used to give, if a landowner, say a knight, say a baron, was giving land to a knight, it was actually only it was only believed to have happened when a piece of turf was handed over. So you had to do a kind of ritual thing, and then of course by that time they sort of record things in their charters and things. But you actually had to, do a physical ritual. So some of the hoards could be associated with some kind of ritualistic event. It's even possible that I wonder that some of it could be. I don't know whether you know of potlatch system in North America, the Pacific Northwest, where somebody, to show how powerful they were, would destroy their wealth. So they would give their wealth away, but destroy some of it as well. And it was the ability to give away and destroy your wealth that proved to everybody how incredibly powerful and magnificent a person you really were. So it's not impossible that some of these hoards are something like that as well. That it's people might have seen this ritual event, somebody showing, I'm chief such and such. Yeah, going to get rid of that stuff. We don't know, but we shouldn't just imagine that it's some kind of just folk forgetting where they left their spondoolies while they went off to do something else.
Ronald was wrecked, of course, in Galway.
So he was, yeah, indeed.
Maybe something like that.
Somebody's cloak that was washed up on the beach and was found got buried under the rocks and turned up in sand.
No,
could be.
Clock, but is that just a suggestion? It could have been.
This is just my
Yeah,
conjecture.
very good.
Yeah. Could be.
Yeah, well, it's
It's
Novel.
actually
It was a wild night, and they were two ships at least.
two ships
And a
someone
crew
went
and-
overboard.
Yep.
They were swimming to the rocks and
Exactly.
lost
And lost it. Yeah. Well, I mean, individual things, you do get things being lost. People, when it comes to coins, sometimes numismatists don't want to make too much of what they call a stray find, because they don't know how it got there. Could have been lost at the time when the coin was in circulation, or it could have been somebody bought a coin in a shop, lost it. So people lose things all the time. So you have to. It's once patterns start to build up that you realise that maybe you've got something going. Right. What else we got? Okay, I'll just go back a wee bit. Okay. Yes. Okay. One of the other great things about the scale hoard is it has some wonderful examples of Viking art. Some of the thistle brooches have these terminals, these round terminals, have wonderful examples of art on them. So let's have a little word or two about that. The type of art that you find on this terminal here is known as Mammon style. Not Mammon, but Mamen, so for a place in Denmark. And that helps to date the hoard as well. Got some pictures of that just in a minute. See if we've got this mixed up a little bit. There we go. That's what happens. There we go. So, luckily for us, this three-dimensional beast that's on the terminal has been flattened out so that you can see the shape of it there. Mammon style is called after an axe that was found in Denmark in a male grave in a place called Mammon, funnily enough, in Jutland. And we'll see the axe just in a little minute. Mammon style is sort of identified with beasts. A lot of Viking art is, but beasts with a sort of thrown back head, shell spirals at the hips, and fleshy tendrils coming off the body as well. And the scale beasts have this. They're also similar to the preceding style of art called Jellinge, which I've got some pictures of just in a minute as well. So there was an argument that developed between the sort of Viking art historians about whether it was Jellinge style or whether it was Mammon style. But James Graham Campbell has come down very heavily on saying it's definitely Mammon style, but it could be sort of coming out of Jelling style, so it's slightly a sort of intermediate development. The closest similar pictures that we have of this type of art actually come from the Isle of Man. There's this cross, this remnant of a cross at Kirkbraden in the Isle of Man, which has very clear mammon beasts on it, which, just flip back, see, very similar. See the head back and the sort of the shell spiral hip. There we go. And the tendrils. Also got another one. Yes, we do. Got another Kirkbraden cross with Mammon style beasts on it too. It seems to be a popular style in the Irish Sea area amongst the Norse people there, and also in the Irish Sea. So that includes southern Scotland, Cumbria, Isle of Man, and Dublin. And that's the type find that gave the name to this particular form of Viking art, the Mammon axe. Now, you won't see that so well, I'm afraid, in Orkney because you're a bit far away, but the PowerPoint will be on the in the Dropbox, so you'll see it there. But there's a very good example of the beast, the head thrown back, and then the shell shape on its hip. And luckily for this type of art, it was the wood used in the grave chamber that this axe was found in was dated to 970, 971. Again, dendrochronology, so they could actually get the actual year when the tree was felled. So this axe, this art style, was current in 970, 971. Whether it was the height of fashion at that time or not, I don't know. Maybe sometimes things that end up in graves are a bit old-fashioned, something that people have kept. But there are other things that other examples of the art that suggest, in the 970s, 980s, this was the style of art that you wanted to have on your gear.
But was there any particular kind of symbolism attached to it?
Well, the beast must mean something. Sometimes it's called the Great Beast. It turns up in a lot of different, all related, but in different pieces of art. But what that actually means, I don't know. Grouping beasts have been a feature of Germanic art for all the way back. But it obviously was felt appropriate to have this great beast on the thing. But more than that, I don't think there's no hidden messages or anything. It's just it's decorative, I would say. But yet again, though, decorative. But why do you have a big beast on it? I mean, not everybody must have a big beast on their equipment. But the Vikings did. But the way the beast was represented over time changed. The other thing that you get in Mammon style, you also get masks, faces, with sort of over twisted, like this one, a sort of twisted beard and moustache. This is the Aarhus runestone from Denmark, and it's dedicated to somebody whose name I've forgotten, but we can look it up. It's a commemoration, and this mask, they've actually found actual masks in Hedeby in the the Viking town that's now in North Germany, it's Schleswig, and they found 2 masks in their excavations there. Masks must have been used for ritual events as well. One of the names for Odin was Grimur, and Grimur just means the masked one. So there's also reference to people wearing masks when they were dancing, in sort of a berserker type dance. So hiding your face so that you could take part in some kind of ritual. But why it's on a kind of gravestone, I don't know. It must be some symbol of the dead person. One of the most beautiful items of Mammon-style art is the Bamberg casket, which was found in Bamberg in Bavaria, in a church. And why I got to the south of Germany, again, it's difficult to say, but it's got both things. It's got the face, mask face on it, in the middle on the clasp, and it's got the beasts with their heads thrown back in it. Yeah. Kind of whatever they're doing, these beasts. And it's made of walrus ivory, the plaques there. And there's one piece of Viking art from Spain which has survived, and the Leon antler box, which again is Mammon style. And it's been suggested that the Bamberg casket and the Leon antler box are perhaps gifts, because this type of art style that you find on the scale, the brooches, was possibly the court art of the kings of Denmark at this time. King Harald Bluetooth, who founded or refounded the kingdom of Denmark, and is attributed with the conversion of the Danes, had at Jelling some stones raised. On the back of this stone, in fact, there's a Christ on a cross, but on this side there's a Mammon beast, and it's been suggested anyway that this was the art style that was very high status, that was associated with kings, particularly King Harald, and that he perhaps, when he was sending gifts, maybe to people in Germany or even people in Spain, he had his craftsmen use Mammon style to do it. There's a slight confusion in the naming of these art styles. The art style that comes before Mammon is known as Jellinge, because art historians have changed their ideas now. They used to think that the Jelling stone was an example of Jellinge art, so they named the art after the stone, but they've now changed their mind, and they think that the Jelling stone is actually a very good example of Mammon style, the slightly later one that turns up in the scale hoard. But I think from our perspective, we should be interested in the fact that somebody in Orkney could amass a huge amount of treasure that had incredibly high status brooches in the first place, but also brooches that exhibit an art style that is associated with very high status things on the mainland of Europe, and seems to have been the favoured art style of King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark. Jelling is a place, I once ran I did it twice actually, a tour of Denmark, a Viking tour. And if anyone wants me to organise such a thing again, I'd be happy to do it. Going around Denmark looking at the sort of top archaeological sites, both from before the Viking Age and the Viking Age itself. And Jelling was one of the places that we went. I would highly recommend it. There are 2 massive mounds, and there's remains of a Viking boat shaped stone setting with these mounds on top, and there are these stones. And it was the centre of Harald Bluetooth's kingdom. And what he did was he seems to have dug up his father and mother and brought them to this site so that they could become Christian in their, their afterlife, as it were. Why had a blue tooth? Well, nobody really knew why he was called Harold Bluetooth until recently. They've started to find a couple of skulls from the Viking Age with filed teeth. And they seem to have had put sort of ash or something in their teeth so that their teeth were blue, or at least had bits of blue in them. So this could be a reference to perhaps Harold Bluetooth also doing that, filing his teeth and making himself look even more fierce. So again, that's something we've talked about, what the Vikings were like, and that they weren't necessarily like Scandinavian peasant farmers of the 19th century. More evidence comes out all the time that they certainly weren't like that. That some of them, at least, were much more like these traditional warriors that we also mentioned a couple of weeks ago, like the Native Americans or the Maori or whatever. Okay, so the style that came after Mammon style, this is just for your own edification, so you can sort of look these things up, is Ringerike style. And that takes the great beast, but it gets sort of elongated and sort of twisted in on itself. So that's Ringerike style. Beginning of the 11th century. So it's sort of, as Mammon style was going out of favour, Ringerike style took off. But there's still, it's twisted beasts and things, but there's a much bigger distinction between the body of the beast and then all this sort of twisty, interlacing tendril stuff sort of around the beast as well. But that's Ringerike. Ringerike is an area in Norway, and that's a weather vane, probably from a ship originally. And the style before Mammon, out of which Mammon grew, was Jellinge style, which I said originally came from the yelling stone, but they changed their mind and they've now put yelling style a little bit further back. But you can see it's certainly connected to Mammon, but the beasts don't have their heads thrown back and they don't have these shell spiral hips. But this is what Mammon style grew out of. Okay. Now, hoards are not a thing of the past, so we'll move on a little bit now. I'm still waiting for a great hoard a new great hoard from the Northern Isles. Unfortunately, one hasn't been discovered yet, but as I say, keep your eyes peeled, rabbit holes, interesting sites. You never know what you might find. Actually, you never know what you might find in somebody's cupboard, because people might not have let on that they found something fabulous. But new hoards are turning up all the time, and I'm sure you were watching the news earlier this year from this the report of a fantastic hoard discovered in Dumfries, just outside Dumfries in Dumfriesshire, that was deposited probably around 900, 905, something like that. And there were silver ingots and arm rings, same as in the other hoards that we've been talking about. But also, this one had an Anglo-Saxon silver cross with enamel decoration, a gold bird pin, which I haven't got a picture of, but you can find online, and most spectacularly of all, a lidded Carolingian pot, a silver vessel full of stuff, which has yet to be taken out of the pot to see what's in it, and fabric on the outside of this as well. Now, this is pretty clearly loot that's been left or lost. I mean, it's got a Christian cross sort of taken out of somebody's, or taken out of a church, and this pot with all sorts of goodies. So they're in the process of extricating the stuff at the moment and finding out exactly what's in it. I know we're up here in Orkney and Shetland. Sometimes we don't have a lot to do with the rest of Scotland, and particularly as you get further and further down. But in the Viking Age, there were close connections between all the Viking parts, including Orkney, Shetland, Caithness, Sutherland, the Hebrides, and Galloway and Dumfries. Not far into Galloway and Dumfries, but the coastal strip. Those were part of the same cultural, all the same network, the same cultural connections. And the same place names turn up. So there's a Borg in Galloway, just as there are umpteen such names up here. And we'll come to place names next week. I think that's what we're going to look at. But I think the scale hoard with these brooches, that shows that connection. These are from the Irish Sea area. And this hoard is also from the Irish Sea area, just a different coast. When we're thinking about the Vikings in Scotland and in the British Isles, you have to think coastal and all the connections. The land is kind of secondary. It's all the coastal connections. And that was an intimate connection and a quick connection. So you could nip around and find out what your neighbours were doing in Galloway more easily, perhaps, than you could find out what was happening in Pictland. Yes, of course, and the other thing, if you ever get to Galloway, go to Whithorn, because at the great monastery of Whithorn there, it seems to have been an Anglo-Saxon monastery up until the mid-9th century, and then it seems to have been taken over by somebody as their own kind of lordly centre, and then in the 10th century, getting into the 11th century, you find it functioning as a sort of a market, very similar to Dublin. The same sort of houses you find in Dublin, you find in Whithorn as well. So it's part of that sort of area. Okay, right. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about the scale of the scale hoard? As I said, it's big, and it's as big as some of the bigger hoards. But some enormous hoards have been discovered. An enormous British hoard is the one from Coordale in the north of England, and that really is massive. It's on the banks of the River Ribble near Preston, and it contains 7,000 coins and over 1,300 pieces of silver, including arm rings and thistle brooches. So, it's the same people we're talking about, but just a massive, much, much bigger hoard. And it weighed about 40 kilograms. So, as I said, the scale hoard is 7 kilograms. This is 40 kilograms. A massive hoard. And looking at the coins and etc., it seems to have been dated to just after 900. And a huge event took place in Viking Britain, the Viking British Isles, in 902, when the Vikings were driven out of Dublin. Dublin had been founded in 841. For 60 years, it had been a thorn in the flesh of the Irish. It had been a power base of the Vikings. It had become a great slave trade market. And the kings of Dublin were as powerful as some of the higher kings in Ireland. Ireland had different types of kings, so they were equivalent to the most powerful kings in Ireland. Then in 902, the Irish drove them out, and Dublin was abandoned. But where did they go? These Vikings of Dublin seem to have gone across to Isle of Man, to Cumbria, to Lancashire, and probably to Dumfries Shire as well. And it's possible, in fact, I think it's pretty probable that the Coordale hoard is some of the wealth of Dublin that has been taken by the Vikings when they escaped from the Irish.
When was it discovered?
I
That's a good question. I can't remember.
was going to ask, was it in a box or something? I mean, when they found it, or was it just buried?
Just buried, yeah. There's a recent one that's been discovered in Yorkshire. It's been come out in a big jar. So the It's a huge one as well, but I didn't bring in much information about that. No, I can't remember when the Coordale hoard was found, so you can. But yeah, internet, it's a great thing.
So it's near Preston.
Yes, it is. But I think what you're seeing there is some of the massed wealth of Dublin created through the practice of the slave trade. However, even that pales into insignificance compared to some of the absolutely gigantic hoards that have been discovered on the island of Gotland. And Gotland seems to have been a kind of central point in the Baltic, where trade from Poland and the eastern Baltic and Russia and the Islamic world all came to Gotland before it then went out to other parts of the Baltic. And they keep, I mean, it's a bit ludicrous. If you look at Gotland news, they keep finding these things. I can't remember what the total is now for Gotland, but when recently it was 150,000 coins had been discovered in Gotland. So it's just, and this one, the Spilling hoard from Spilling's farm, was discovered in 1999. I don't know why I didn't look up when the Coordale hoard was discovered. There you go. It's always the thing I don't look up that people ask me. But this one turned up in 1999, so it's a very recent hoard. And it weighs 67 kilograms with 14,200 coins. And 500 arm rings. Slightly different type of arm ring, Baltic arm rings, but the same sort of idea. So, and coins from all over, Islamic coins and German coins. The interesting thing about Islamic coins, there's enormous numbers of them up till about just after the year 1000, and then there are none. But you find hoards in Scandinavia, but you find Anglo-Saxon coins. And it's been suggested that the second Viking Age, which is sometimes what Svein Forkbeard's invasion of England and Knut the Great, that's sometimes known as the second Viking Age, from around 975, well, that's a bit later than that, in 990 to 1000, was because the Islamic silver was starting to dry up. So the guys who wanted to maintain their power had to go somewhere else.
Didn't also the slavery decline when Christianity came in?
Yeah, it did, but it was still if the Islamic market dried up because there was no longer any silver coming in, so that was a bit of a problem. But Dublin continued as a slave market into the 12th century, maybe even later than that. There's a good article written on Dublin, the slave trade in Dublin, and people were taking slaves right into the late 12th century and exporting them to Dublin and then further afield. Bristol was a slave trade centre as well. So there were still, it didn't really make much difference.
Yes, so yes.
It was supposed to.
It wasn't a sudden stop.
No, it was supposed to. And you find lots of papal bulls and things saying, oh, you mustn't take Christian slaves and things like that. But they managed to ignore that. In fact, that had a long tradition, and there was let's think, St. Boniface in the 8th century. One of the things that the Pope told him to do when he was in Germany was to stop people selling Christians to pagans for human sacrifice. So, that took a long time. So they were still ignoring the advice right up until the 12th, maybe even 13th century. Yeah. And there's a good example actually of of slave trading between Scotland and England. In the 1120s, David I invaded England to help his niece and Stephen in their campaign in the English Civil War then at that point. And before his defeat at the Battle of the Standard, which I think was 1128, something like that, his raid had been so successful in the north of England that it was said that every house, no matter how mean, had an English slave helping out. So yeah, unfortunately, it took a long time to finish. Yeah. So what else do we want to say about this? Well, I thought it might be worth just having a little mention about this Islamic connection. You'll have seen a picture. This was back again. It's always. Hold on a sec. I'll have to come back quickly the other way as well. Mm-hmm. Right.
Just before you move on, you had
Yeah.
the Oxen bracelet.
I did, yes. The reason I had that was this one. One of the it's because of that, which is one of the scale hoard twisted silver necklaces, and that one, see, a beautiful one there. And although we don't have one of those in Shetland, we have a gold one. We shouldn't forget that the Vikings did occasionally like a bit of gold as well. Everything they really wanted was silver, but because there was a lot of that about. But when they could get their hands on some gold, then they did too. So that's the Oxna necklace or whatever you want to call it, which is the same style, this twisted style. We'll add something on that, just a wee second. Or did I? How odd. Anyway, found on the island of Oxna, on a piece of land that had been scalped. So it was found lying there. I had wrote a note down on that, but where that... hang on a sec. I must have got rid of it. Okay, anyway, it was a guy in Hamnavo who asked the man. Yes, exactly. But unfortunately, nothing else has turned up on that site, as far as we know. I don't know. Maybe somebody's been out and had a good poke about.
Didn't he keep it?
He did, yeah. He did.
He was going to use it when he married.
Is that what he was going to use it for? Ah, right, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, okay. Well, that makes sense. That's a very good idea. I know he'd had it for a couple of years before it was discovered that he had it. Yeah.
And it could be like you were saying before, it could be that somebody else had it
Mm-hmm.
a long time before that, and then there's not actually a Viking thing as such.
Except that I think the story came out afterwards that he did find it on Oxna.
Yeah,
yeah.
But I'm just saying that it could have belonged to somebody,
It's definitely Viking, is it? Or is
Yes.
it Irish?
No, it seems to be well, it's Viking. Yeah, it's generally accepted. It doesn't really have anything particularly obvious that could identify it. So it's doesn't have anything that says obviously Irish about it. But we know that the Vikings like to do these twisted metal things. It's a beautiful thing, yeah. So I would say it's just a gold version of just a gold version. It is a gold version of the silver ones that you find at scale. And if it's like some of these other hoards have been found, it's one or two things that turn up, and then people go and have a look and discover more. It's not the sort of thing you would lose, one would think. It's presumably associated with something else, whether it's a ritual offering, that's the thing, and people have done something around it, or whether there's more to be found. I would think there's perhaps more to be found out in Oxna. So I've got a boat, if anyone's interested. Yeah, but there's not a lot more can be said about it because there's no context. There's just the interesting story about them finding it.
Going to say about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, put you off your track.
Not at all. No, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, just some couple of words. Why the Islamic world? You know, we have, shall we say, negative views of it nowadays, but 9th and 10th century, into the 11th century, it was the greatest power, civilizing force, centre of arts and science in the world at that time. And the very heart of it all was Baghdad. And Baghdad was a new city. It was built in the early 9th century. And by the time that some of these coins are being minted, there could have been well over 1 million people in Baghdad at that time. There was no city really, maybe one in China, but really other than that there was nothing to compare with it. And the heart of Baghdad at this time was a round city, as you can see. And the caliphs, it was a sort of house. I've forgotten I don't know what they called it in Arabic, but it was sort of a house of philosophy that they established, and they brought and attracted scholars from all over the Islamic world and further from India and from China to go there. So they had a great interest in all sorts of things, and obviously that was the heart of a great trading empire as well. And as I say, there was intimate connections between the Viking world and this the centre of the world at that time. We tend to think of the Mediterranean as being the centre of the world. We have a sort of Greeks, Romans worldview. Well, at this time, that all shifted to the Islamic world. And, of course, the remaining scholarship of the ancient world, some of it was in Constantinople, of course, but a great deal of it was being maintained and gathered and worked upon in Baghdad. So we even know, well, I'm going to whiz right back to this bit again, so try not to get seasick. There are quite a lot of Arabic sources that mention the Vikings, and at the early period, they're known as the Rus, or the Al-Rus, and sometimes also known as the Varangi, which is the same word as the Varangians, like the Varangian Guard in Constantinople. There's debate about how Scandinavian were the Rus, but certainly in the 9th century, there's no doubt that they were predominantly Scandinavian in culture. As time went on, they became more Slavic, so you get a change from Old Norse names to Slavonic names amongst the ruling elite in the sort of 10th, towards the end of the 10th century. But in the early 9th century, before they've established their sort of city-states, Kiev and Novgorod, they are pretty much recorded as trading. I mean, they're coming down the rivers and they're trading with various people on their way down to trading with the Islamic world, and also Constantinople as well. But we're talking about the Islamic sources. So there's a lot of Islamic sources, and luckily they've been translated, so they've been understood. And one of the earliest accounts of the connections is this Ibn Horadadbeh, 840s, thereabouts, and he mentions the Rus. And he's the one that tells us that the Rus brought slaves and furs and walrus ivory and all sorts of exotic goods, and that some of them finished their their trip by camel across the desert to Baghdad. So you can imagine Vikings on a camel. I think that's quite a nice image. How many of them did that, of course, we don't know, but he noticed this interesting fact. And we know that the trade must have been huge, because the number of coins of Islamic coins that you find in the Baltic area and in Scandinavia, are into the hundreds of thousands, and these are the ones that survived. So there must have been millions of silver coins coming from the Islamic world. So that's big trade. Our best account, which you can now read because the stuff's in the Dropbox, and I just extracted some bits of Ibn Fadlan. In fact, there's more material about Ibn Fadlan online. The bit that's on the notes is about the boat burial in particular and the horrible things that happened to the slave girl. But Ibn Fadlan also provides more information about these Rus that he meets at Bulgar, way over on the Volga. And one of the things he tells us is they were tattooed head to foot in green. It's called green patterns. So again, these are not your sturdy farmers. These are kind of straight out of Mad Max or something. If we can believe what he's saying, and why not? And I suppose one might imagine them patterned in Yelling style designs with great beasts on their bodies and gripping creatures and all sorts of things. He says they're tall and they're sturdy, red-haired, which he means just fair and red or various things. Let's not get into the Vikings red-haired thing that has surfaces now and again. They like to drink a lot of alcohol, and they pray to their gods, or the fetishes, if you like, wooden gods, before taking part in trade, so that the gods will help them to get a best deal out of these Islamic folk. And an intriguing thing he also mentions is that at Bulgar, he builds a wooden mosque, or is involved in building a wooden mosque, for 5,000 of the Rus who've converted to Islam. So it's almost when I've been reading about this stuff, I wondered, why didn't the Vikings become Islamic? And I still don't have an answer for it, because they might have done, and some of them did. It's perhaps just because the connection to the Islamic world broke around the year 1000, 1010, or whatever it was, when the Islamic silver stopped coming in. There may well have been Muslims amongst the Vikings in Scandinavia, in places like Birka and Hedeby, just as there were Viking Christians before their whole society became Christian, when people were choosing what they wanted to do, what they wanted to be, and what was useful. Because it's possible that, Ibn Horadabi also mentions when these Rus end up in Baghdad, they claim to be Christian. Okay, this is the 840s. But he's pretty dubious that they are Christian. But if they say they're Christian, then they're people of the book, so the Muslims are allowed to trade with them. And we know that the Vikings in Western Europe, when they were in contact with the Franks and various people, they sometimes got baptized just to allow them to get involved. And then as soon as they got back to Scandinavia, okay, get back to the old ones again. So
it kind of run in parallel, doesn't it? I mean, they embrace both the old and Christianity, and
yes,
didn't see a contradiction.
Well, they don't seem to have. There are these lovely moulds. Well, I don't quite know what we make of these. There are moulds that have come up, that have been discovered, that you could pour a metal in one end and you get a cross. You pour it in the other end and you get Thor's hammer. So somebody was there what would you like? I would like 2 Thorpe salmon and a cross piece. And we have the Icelandic sagas that tell us about Helgi the Lean from the Hebrides, who was probably arrived in Iceland in the late 9th century. He was a great, very powerful figure and connected to other very powerful figures. But the story about him was that he was a Christian, but he prayed to Thor if it was an important matter. So, you know.
That sort of crops up in Greenland as well, where it depends what you're talking about, which they believe in.
Right, yeah. Well, and this whole thing about conversion, we could talk about that for an enormous amount. Conversion takes a long time. There's the sort of the actual event, then there's the generations of explaining to people what it is that they've just signed up to, and then there's the final. Okay, right. I suppose we do believe that in these old gods. We don't believe in them anymore, but we still believe in all the other beings that weren't quite gods. We haven't been forbidden about believing in them. So you get, the survival of Old Norse supernatural beings right up until the present day, and some people believing in them. So as you say, it's a long process, and at the beginning of it, you accept the new God into amongst the other gods that you believe in, and you use him for, getting on in the world. And but it was accepted, I think, in the Catholic world about how to convert people. First of all, you didn't you might destroy. You built your church on the places that people always went to anyway. You don't treat newly baptized people as harshly as you would people who had been Christian for generations. So you sort of let them have this. The slag, yeah. And the Vikings, of course, were very good at making use of slag. They would do it. Oh, gosh, we're running out of time. There we go. So we're about to run out of time, which is a pity. But read up Ibn Fadlan. Just the other two. There are 2 possible visitors from the Islamic world to Scandinavia, the Viking Age. Al-Ghazal, who the queen of the Vikings wherever he went, probably somewhere in Denmark, called Nud, fell in love with him, and Al-Tartushi, who seems to have arrived in Hedeby in 970, and he says that the Vikings, both men and women, wore eye makeup, which made their eyes look very attractive, and their singing was like the barking of dogs, but an awful lot worse. And he wasn't particularly impressed by the place either. He thought it was a dirty, squalid town, and yet that was the biggest town in the Viking world at that time. So, on the one hand then, slaves, furs, walrus ivory, Frankish swords went to the Islamic world. The Franks had forbidden the export of Frankish swords, which were the best swords in the world at that time, but somehow or other the Vikings managed to get them, and that was one of the main trade routes. And this is where Frankish swords have been discovered outside of the Frankish Empire. And it's actually recorded by Ibn Horadadbeh that's one of the things that the Vikings have with them. And just to show you, I haven't got a map of Scotland, unfortunately, with the dirhams that have been found, but there's Anglo-Saxon England, where dirhams have turned up in Viking contexts, a lot of them. And this the number of coins that have turned up from Samarkand in Western Europe, and Eastern Europe as well. You can see the enormous number from Samarkand. That's 1 mint in the Islamic world, and just 9,000 coins from Samarkand have turned up in Sweden, just under 3,000 in Russia, etc. But you've got lots of other mints as well. So we're talking huge numbers of coins here. And just one other thing, it's not just Islamic coins that have turned up. There are Indian coins too, which are from mints just south of the Islamic world. That must have been the Islamic traders must have been trading with north of India. They've acquired Indian coins. They've traded with the Vikings, and they've made it up. So you find Indian coins in in these places where the little blobs are. And in Helgö, which is an important site in Sweden, you find this Buddha, which is a pre-Viking Buddha in a Viking context. So who knows? Maybe there was even a Viking Buddhist, although that seems like a contrast. But there we are. I think we'll bring that to an end just now, so we don't get locked in. But it hopefully can give you this idea, feel for the size of the Viking world. So, farewell, folks, down in other parts. I hope you managed to see at least some of that, and you can look at the PowerPoint online.
Yeah, thank you very much and good night.
It's a pleasure. Good night.